Welcome to the Sydney Masonic Centre. Welcome to Sydney for those of you who have flown in from other lands. And it is wonderful to be seeing a full sold-out house tonight for this inaugural big dialogue in Sydney. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I can see from the full house and from our expanding wait list that there is a huge hunger in Sydney for what we are about to do tonight. The big dialogues have been running for 5 years to the month in Brisbane, with Melbourne and Canberra added last year, bringing people together from across divides, ideological, generational, and otherwise, enabling in-depth public discussions on big issues and challenges, modeling better public discussions to inspire others to follow suit. I'm your MC for tonight, Gigi Foster. I'm a professor of economics at the University of New South Wales. I'm also the VP academic on the Economic Society of Australia's New South Wales Branch Council, and that's why we have this venue tonight. This is where the Australian Conference of Economists is happening today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. I'm also a prior panelist on 2 different Brisbane dialogues. One was the inaugural one on universal basic income and one on pandemic management a few years ago. I've also been several times, I think 4 or 5 times, on ABC Q&A. And apparently somebody said that the dialogues are what ABC Q&A should be. And I can say for sure, having been on both, that's true. And I also think probably a couple of the panelists you're going to be hearing from tonight who have also been on both, or at least ABC Q&A, and now the dialogues will agree. I feel, as a professor at a public university, a responsibility to be relevant in what I do to the Australian people who pay my salary. And so part of why I do these kinds of things, and I'm interested in the very issue we're talking about tonight, is because it's an issue that deeply affects Australian households. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. Tonight's event is the result of a collaboration between Australian Dialogues and Australians for Science and Freedom, or ASF for short. I co-founded ASF about 2 years ago as a cross-disciplinary, nonpartisan, all-volunteer free think tank with others dedicated to restoring Australian society across many dimensions where we see problems, including through encouraging civil discourse and the adoption of scientific rather than ideological or politicized approaches to solving the country's challenges. ASF is devoted to discovering what will help Australia and to bringing Australian communities back together, just like what I see happening here tonight. We've got more events in the lineup for the rest of the year, including a film screening at Fox Studios in September and our annual Progress Through Science and Freedom Conference from 21 to 23 November at UNSW. To keep up to date with all of our activities, go to subscribe at scienceandfreedom.org. Our monthly newsletters are free and packed with information and opportunities to lend your hand to our efforts. Our partner for this event, Australian Dialogues, is evolving out of the Brisbane Dialogues, the country's first dedicated civil discourse or bridging organization, with a mission to support other organizations to conduct across-the-aisle discussions on big ideas and issues of national and international significance, especially contentious ones. It is an entirely independent, neutral, nonpartisan, volunteer-based community organization and aspires to being intergenerational and inclusive. The Dialogues have recently formed an advisory panel of very distinguished Australians who share a serious concern about polarization, deteriorating discourse, and are generously lending their expertise and networks to the cause, notably including one of our speakers tonight, Jennifer Westacott AC, who has been writing and speaking about these problems for some time. The stage is set for many more big dialogues around the country with local coalitions of the willing, collaborations like this one with the Economic Society of Australia of Queensland branch, in next month in Brisbane, and one with Ormond College in Melbourne in September. If you'd like to know more, especially those who are interested in collaborating or supporting the effort, Google Brisbane Dialogues or Australian Dialogues, check out those handles on social media and YouTube, or contact the convener, Murray Hancock, right over here on info@brisbanedialogues.org. The Brisbane Rule, created at the launch of the Dialogues, always bears repeating. It's a variation of the Chatham House Rule, which many here will know, adapted for public events in the digital age, and it is this. All participants agree to listen carefully, speak respectfully, and concentrate on the content of discussions, not on characters, before, during, and afterwards, online as well as offline. To housekeeping, mobile phones on silent mode, please. Fire exits should be clearly marked. There's one right there, and there's one right there. Male and female restrooms are located out there and then to your right. Feel free to move around as unobtrusively as possible during the discussion if you need to, if you want to get drinks from the bar. And I think that's it for the housekeeping. It's customary for the MC at a big dialogue to acknowledge the fact that we meet on land that was cared for across thousands of years by people who, to the best of our knowledge, had strong traditions of dialogue long before the birth of J.S. Mill, who opined that he who knows only his side of the case knows little of that. Aboriginal cultural traditions included a respect for deep listening. Both Indigenous and Western traditions, on which most of Australian society has been built, include the aspiration to create and use spaces expressly for engaging in discussion of important matters, in which the process of dialogue is more important than being right. In today's modern culture, we don't always meet these ideals. Sometimes we try to cancel or denigrate rather than to understand those who have different views. But this dialogue and the entire Australian dialogue's enterprise embody a belief that while we may not agree about everything, we can all agree on the value of restoring the great traditions of dialogue upheld by our ancestors. Thank you for being here tonight and hoping to be part of this restoration. Speaking of thanks, thank you to our many volunteers, to Andrew Logan, to Barney Barnard, and of course to Murray Hancock, without whom none of these kinds of events would be possible. Special thanks to buyers of conveners tables who have enabled us to cover the cost of this event, reinforcing the Big Dialogue model to make it easier for more organizations to adopt. This includes Jason Strecker and others at his table here, including Warren Mundine and Anthony Dillon, renowned for their work to encourage positive and productive dialogue regarding the Aboriginal community throughout Australia, and Houston Kemp. Thanks to three who donated conveners tables, which has allowed us to give tickets to more young people, including a huge contingent from Randwick Public School, RBB Economics, and two Melbourne-based supporters who could not be here tonight, Peter Cooper and Charles Kiefel. I'm also delighted to acknowledge the presence here tonight, also at the Strecker family table, of New South Wales member of the Legislative Council, John Ruddock.
Huge.
Thanks are due as well to the Economic Society of Australia's New South Wales branch, whose leadership was kind enough to allow us to use their booking of the SMC this year for ACE, making it possible for us to hold this event here. Finally, thanks to everyone who has helped spread the word about this event, and all those in Brisbane, Sydney, and elsewhere who have contributed to the development and staging of the dialogue series over the past 5 years. Far too many to acknowledge individually. Before introducing the speakers, I'd like to encourage everyone to text questions to the number you can see on the screen. Succinct, relevant questions with names given may be used later during our Q&A session. We also hope to take a few live questions from the floor. Now, to introduce the speakers. Please hold applause until they're all on stage. Adam Creighton, Chief Economist and Senior Fellow at the Institute for Public Affairs. Alison Preston, Professor of Economics at the University of Western Australia. Jennifer Westacott AC, Chancellor of Western Sydney University. And last but not least, tonight's moderator, Dr. Cameron Murray, Chief Economist at Fresh Economic Thinking. Please join me in welcoming all the speakers to the stage. And it's over to you, Cameron.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm just going to get straight into it. You may have heard the phrase cost of living crisis. Please raise your hand if you haven't. You can just leave. So we have heard this phrase. I'm hoping to tease out from the panelists today how they interpret that, whether there's any merit or substance to it, and see where we agree and disagree about what we're calling the cost of living crisis and what that means for Australian policy. So to open the floor, I want to give each panelist a few minutes to sort of pitch it. And it, you know, we ask people for elevator pitches. I'm going to call this the bus to work pitch. You've met a young tourist on the bus, and they're a political science student. And they've travelled to Australia, and all they hear is cost of living crisis, cost of living crisis. And they say, please help me understand, what do they mean, cost of living crisis? It's 5 minutes to your stop. What do you tell this young person? Maybe we'll start at this end with Jennifer.
Sure. So I'd say across Australia, between 21 and 24, all aspects of everyday life, the cost of goods and services has gone up year on year, and those cost increases have outpaced people's wages. And then I'd say, if you don't believe me, here's some data. In Sydney, electricity up by 8.2% every year. Gas and other fuels up by 8.7%. We now talk about energy poverty. On housing, rents up by 7.3% in 24. Mortgage interest rate charges up by 26% in 2024. What does that really mean? Well, 51% of people's household income is servicing a mortgage in 2024 compared to 46 in 2023, 41 in 21-22. Then I'd say, well, is that really having an impact on people? Absolutely. 58% of low-income renters are now in housing stress. We used to talk about the average price of a house being about 4 years of your income. Now it's 7 years of your income. Now on top of that, they're paying an extra nearly 5% for their food, an extra nearly 8% for their transport, and these are annual figures. Year in, year out, these are going up. And so I'd say to that person, assuming that we've already been held up on the public transport system, that wages in real terms have not gone up since 2012. And so the way people feel is that they are working hard, they're trying hard, but they just can't get ahead. And they feel this sense of a crisis of their inability to meet their basic bills, their inability to get that sense of getting ahead, and that sense that their wages just aren't keeping pace.
Great. So this is still going. And Alison has jumped on, strangely enough. How would you pitch it to this young student?
If I had been on the bus at the same time as Jennifer and overheard that, I would just have said, look, I think she's right, so you don't need to get any more from me. I agree with everything that she said. However, what I could have said was, look, I think it depends on who you're speaking to. If you were speaking to my mate Peter, who's retired and he's got, nice superannuation and nice retirement income, and he's got a couple of properties and he's buying new cars because they're coming in as cheap as ever, and he doesn't eat chocolate the way I do, so he's not affected by the fact that chocolate's gone up so much in price. And today's World Chocolate Day, by the way. Then he might say, what cost of living crisis? However, if you were to speak to my son, I've got 3 sons, but I'm going to just channel one right now. My eldest son's 31. He's got 2 children, both planned, he tells me. Anyway, he's got two young children. One's 2 months and one's coming on 2 years old, and his partner's not working right now. He's on a good wage. He's on about 150,000, which is definitely a good wage, but he's really, really struggling to make ends meet, and that's on a good wage. He had a large HEX debt, and the HEX debt was sucking out all of his, not all of his income, but he was paying the 10% level, but that's effectively 13% because it actually comes off your nominal at the end of the day. And just had that absolute feeling of, I can't get ahead. I'm never going to be able to get ahead. I'm never going to be able to afford a place to live. It really, really actually get him quite anxious about it. So we stepped in to help him. And that's not necessarily helped him because he doesn't have that agency now as well. He doesn't like to be dependent on his mum and dad either. So he's got a crisis there. And yet I don't think he's got a crisis compared to the people that Jennifer's just been talking about.
Okay, so now it's my turn. All right. Well, we'd have to be assuming that this person from overseas is from Switzerland, because that's the only country that hasn't had a cost of living crisis, actually. The maximum inflation rate in Europe was 3% in 2022. Just found out today. Isn't that extraordinary? It peaked here, I think, 7.8%, something like that. In the US, I think it was more than 9%. But by and large, this cost of living crisis, they might not use the phrase overseas, but certainly it's a Western world phenomenon that's been very much with us since 2022. And in fact, I asked Google Trends today, which is quite interesting sometimes. You can ask it about phrases and how much they're searched. And there was a global spike in April 2022. That's when this crisis started, very much so. So if you look at the Australian data before then, it was pretty much flatline. No one was searching cost of living. But then in April 22, oh my God, soared. And that month is when the ABS released the inflation figures of 5.1%, which was the highest it had been since 2000 or 1999. So there was a lot of media coverage. There was a lot of awareness. People were looking into it. That's when it started. And then there was a fall off. And then pretty much ever since then, it has simmered at a really high level. So, we're still in the crisis. I mean, I would probably joke with this chap that I was talking to on the bus about the word crisis, because that obviously implies something temporary. It's not temporary. So please, can we stop using the word crisis? We need to find a better word. 3 years is not a crisis. But I would also say, and look, to all the valid points that have been raised about percentage increases in this and that, but I would say that it's a cost of government crisis, not a cost of living crisis. Pretty much the reason for all the price increases is basically government, the whole way through. So firstly, superannuation, more of your money has been taken off you than it was before, gone from 9 to 12%. That's quite a big increase. So throughout this whole cost of living crisis, we've gone from 9% of your wages being taken to 12%. Very bizarre for me. But also the biggest one is what caused this whole thing. It was the COVID response, right? Like, no one likes talking about it because the media cheered it all off. They were enthusiastic about it. And that's why you don't get any articles about it, because they're all embarrassed. Believe me, I was a journalist for 13 years. I know. They don't write about it. I mean, even conservative media is embarrassed by it, right? I mean, you had massive money printing, hundreds of billions of dollars. Just in Australia, hundreds of billions of dollars were printed by the Reserve Bank to fund government budget deficits. We had a 7.8% budget deficit in 2021. Extraordinarily high. Switzerland, by the way, barely had any at all. But that's a whole other debate because they didn't lock down. They didn't have a massive deficit. So it was all created by the government. You throw all this money into the economy, of course prices are going to go up, right? That's what happened. And then it's not just that. Then on top of that, you've got net zero. You're closing down all your cheap energy. Sorry, you're going to get me to stop, so I'll keep going on.
The stop is coming up.
The stop is coming. So I will stop. But as you can tell, anyway, back to you, Cameron.
Great. Well, that was a fun bus ride. What have we learned from that? One of the common themes, I think, there is that you could possibly relabel what we're calling a cost of living crisis. I'm an economist, so what we sort of do is we can look at the same thing from different perspectives. On the one hand, we're saying the nominal price of goods has gone up. Well, another way of saying that is real incomes have gone down. So is it an income crisis? Is that a better way to look at it? Does anyone have a view? Alison, maybe start.
I was going to say, sorry, I took a switch. Am I on? Off? On? Don't know. I was going to say that.
Off. No, off.
Correct.
Just give it a second.
Put a light list.
There you go.
I'm on. I was going to say that definitely real wages is a problem. So real wages have been flat since about 2012. And they've increased a little bit lately, but on the whole, they've been flat since 2012. And so that's a real problem. And that means that a lot of expenditure has got away from a bundle of people. And then I'm looking at Daniela here, and we know that there's been a productivity problem, and that's bound to come up in this conversation as well, because I think you're right not to call this a crisis. It's here for longer. Is it a cost of living crisis? Yeah. Is it a house and affordability problem? I think fundamentally that really is the crux of it. But then I also think it's the bigger question for me is about our living standards. If we've been a wealthy country, we're a rich country, and our living standards have been phenomenal, and they're seriously under threat now.
Yeah, I agree. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but I think we've got to stop using the expression cost of living crisis and start talking about the standard of living that we are likely to bequeath to the next generation, which is really unforgivable, to be honest, that we are going to hand over a set of living standards that we should have taken control of some reins. Now, we've still got time to do that, but I think I'd love to see us move the debate away from cost of living to standard of living because, as Adam says, a crisis doesn't go on for 3 years. But some of these things, some of these relativities, these look like they're starting to bake into the economy, and that's, I think, a really serious problem.
Just on the money illusion issue, which of course which is a concept in economics that the ordinary people don't understand, kind of changes in price level. There's something to that, So we had so the CPI in Australia went up 24% from 2020 to March 25, and the previous 5 years it went up 7%, right? So that's quite a striking change in the rate of price growth. But it must be said, and I did write down these figures today, according to the ABS, employee earnings went up 21% during the most recent 4-year period. This only goes to August 24 last year because the ABS hasn't released, of course, the figures for August this year. So it went up 21%, so not quite as much. But then the previous 4 years, it went up 15%. So yes, people have gone backwards, but they haven't gone backwards by as much as they might perceive. But they've still gone backwards. And by the way, it's worth pointing out they were well ahead for every year for decades, basically. So it was a big structural change in their everyday experience. And it's not just, we look at the CPI, but remember the CPI excludes house prices, right?
Yeah.
And there are various intellectual discussions about whether they should be in or not, right? And they haven't been in since the 1980s. But certainly, if you're the ordinary person reading the paper and you see that Adelaide, Perth and Brisbane prices in that 4-year period have gone up 80%, which is mind-blowing, actually. I mean, I was in the US for 4 years. I came back and in many ways I was like, oh my God, what going to happen while I was gone? Some crazy stuff here. So you got 40% increase in house price, rents up 40%, and even more in Sydney. I mean, I moved to Melbourne. I couldn't afford to live here anymore. So, huge changes.
So I think we'd all agree then that housing is a bit of an issue at the moment. Does anyone out there think housing's an issue for young people? Or particularly the people that you mentioned, Alison, the retired person who owns their own home is pretty comfortable. And if the average house in Sydney goes from 1 million to 2 million, they're happy as Larry. I might sort of get us into housing by asking the question, didn't we want the house prices to go up during COVID when we put the cash rate to zero and gave everyone money and did home builder? Like, isn't this what we wanted? Or are we now looking back going, maybe those were a mistake?
I have to come first on this one because it absolutely just irritates me immensely. And it's a fantastic example to give when you teach first-year economics to just show how the politicians don't understand supply and demand. It just drives you mad. In fact, it's not just on housing policy. We can think of a whole range of policies. I mean, they're still doing it. You'd think we'd have learned our lesson, but we're still actually coming up with these just crazy policies. So the other thing I also wanted to just say on that one, Cameron, was this is a problem that's come in recent years since COVID, but it's been coming for a long time. We've known this is going to be a problem we can see it. In fact, I was reading an article in preparation for this that Peter MacDonald had written. It was something I'd printed from the Fin Review a few years ago, and it's on small print, and my eyesight's getting worse. And I thought the top said 2003, and I looked a bit closer, and it said, 2023, and I looked a bit closer, and it was 2003. So it was more than 20 years ago, and the article still spoke to me. So this has been a long time in the making.
I agree. And I remember I cannot tell you how many calls I sat on during COVID when I was running the Business Council with everybody saying we need to get ready for post-COVID. We need to be releasing more land. We need to be rezoning more land. We need to be speeding up the planning approvals. But this is a long time in the making. To Alison's point, this is simple supply and demand. We keep seeing responses on the demand side, we see a price problem on the supply side. We've had no innovation really in the housing market in respect of housing product, housing finance, prefabricated dwellings, the stuff that other countries are way ahead of. We haven't had a third sector in Australia, a housing association sector that's commercially viable, that's substantial. We have not released enough land. We have not rezoned land. We now have a situation in Sydney where to build a high-rise residential building is now not commercially viable because there are so many add-ons to the cost. We've not taken a systemic view towards kind of the housing system. Houses that are in residential zones in some parts of the country are still subject to a merit assessment by a local government authority, as opposed to a house in a residential zone should be an automatic as-of-right approval. We're trying, I think, in New South Wales to do some really good things about rezoning and up the densities around transport nodes. That all takes a long time. Meanwhile, there's big sites in other parts of Australia that aren't serviced in terms of infrastructure. We just haven't got this right, and we've known it for a long time. It's been coming for a long time, and we just keep tinkering at the system here as opposed to taking a whole of system approach, a national strategy, and just get on with the things that everyone knows what has to be done here. It's not
What are you
rocket science.
What are you proposing specifically then on housing as a national strategy?
Well, some of the things I just talked about. Well, things like fixing up the planning approval system. I mean, why is a house in a residential zone subject to any kind of assessment other than, why isn't it all done through AI and through some portal? I mean, surely we can use technology here. Why aren't we using patent books to say, well, if your house is this kind of standard in this zone, it gets approved? Why aren't we bringing forward 15, 20 years of land supply? Why aren't we working to get some of that land serviced instead of, this is a big issue in Western Sydney. People in Western Sydney are paying for the infrastructure that people in Eastern Sydney have had for nothing for years because they have to meet the costs of developer contributions of tollways and things like that. So, I could spend an hour on fixing the housing crisis, but I won't. Everyone in this room knows how to fix it. And none of this, I think, is politically very difficult.
Well, I'll put it to you. How much would you like, 67% of people own their own home. How much would you like their largest asset to fall in value by?
I do put it to fall.
Because it sounds not politically easy, doesn't it?
Well, it's not about prices falling. It's about the rate of increase. That's the point you're making. It's the relativities around wages and, the sort of cost of servicing a mortgage. I don't think I think this always comes to this argument, well, that means you want house prices to go down. It's about the rate of increase relative to people's wages and their capacity to meet those mortgages.
I'm going to pass it over to Adam, but maybe I just want a show of hands. If you would like your house to go down in value by 30%, please raise your hand. Or any houses to go down in value if you don't own a home.
It's a story, Danielle.
Okay, and now put your hands down. Put your hands up if you think that probably wouldn't be very good for you if your house price fell by 30%. So I feel like, thank you for participation. You've now qualified to be the moderator at the next year's event. But I guess I'm trying to bring it back to the first points about the distribution that Alison raised, that the retirees are happy, the young people trying to buy a house are not. Is the solution redistribution then? But maybe before I get to that, I want to get Adam's view on housing, because you were living in the US after COVID and during the boom. In a lot of areas in the US that have great planning and whatnot, had the highest house price increases in the last few years.
Well, in general, housing, I mean, except for the elite bubbles, San Francisco, New York, DC, etc., housing's a lot cheaper in the US. Much, much cheaper. Kind of shockingly so by Australian standards. You can still buy 3-4 bedroom houses for $300,000, $250,000 US dollars in reasonably large cities in the so-called flyover states. There are far fewer regulations in the US, much easier to build. They have a different tax structure, more property taxes, less stamp duties and so forth. So there's various reasons for it. But certainly high house prices in Australia are a function of regulation, right? I mean, we do it on purpose. I mean, a fairly esteemed economics journalist who I was talking to just the other day had just bought a place in Canberra, and he was laughing about how just how hysterically funny it was about how high house prices were in Canberra, because it's just surrounded by nothing, right? So it's purely regulation that keeps them high. Zoning. And, I must say, I had the privilege of being at the bar at the Intercontinental a few weeks ago in Sydney, which has this incredible view over the eastern suburbs, right? Uninterrupted. And I didn't see a single crane. And I was just shocked by that. So here's all these people who generally support high population growth, I would say, I'm guessing, but not a single crane, not a single dwelling approval. So where are all these people going? Out west, and of course it pushes up the values of their houses. So, the politics of this, you're right to talk about it, because people do like the value of their property going up. People talk about it. Australians are obsessed with it. I mean, I did a tweet recently. We have these the data comes out every month or so, and it's wall-to-wall coverage for days. I'm like, this is kind of strange, isn't it? I mean, that we're obsessed. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop. Just jumping on.
So, just a couple of points here. I mean, I put my hand up to say I wouldn't mind my property going down, but totally appreciate the politics of that are just never going to happen because of all the other people that would lose out. Mine is paid. A couple of points I just wanted to make there was there's been a bit of a wealth effect, I think, happening as well. So there's my husband works in a high school in a relatively low socioeconomic area in Perth. And the houses there, the average price has gone up from 500 to maybe 700, which I know is like, you guys would just think amazing here in Sydney. And they're really excited because their house has gone up $200,000. So they'll go off now and have a holiday or whatever because they've got this wealth effect, even though they don't necessarily have any more income. The other point I just wanted to make, again, thinking of some of the stories that my husband, Stuart, would tell me, he's got kids there, and this is coming back to the rental side. So we've got a lot of people now that are going to be in rental accommodation for life. If you'd been at the conference today, and the last one of the sessions was Brendan Coates from the Creighton Institute, and he was talking about old age people who will be renters for life and the depths of poverty that they are in. So there's a lot of people going to be renters for their whole life. Renting is no longer just a stepping stone to get your own property. And I don't think, and I'm not a housing expert by any means, that the private rental market is set for long-term rentals. And I think back to myself growing up in Scotland in a mining town. We grew up in what you would call here is social housing, and we called council housing. And everybody grew up in the council house, so there was no stigma attached to it. Whereas now Stuart will tell me at school, by the week, there's some kid in his class crying because the family's having to move house, they can't afford to stay in the area, the kid's having to move school, she's having to leave her bedroom and her friends and move somewhere else that she doesn't want to go to, their education's disrupted. It's really, really problematic.
Maybe I'll pick you up on that. So what do we do then? If that's the scenario, the rent's gone up, I have to move. Do you want to regulate rents or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably, I mean, obviously, I certainly favour a massive social housing investment programme, but nevertheless, coming back to that rental market, and again, I appreciate from the perspective of the people who are the landlords, but it needs some regulation around that for long-term rental.
So I'll put one more question on housing to you. We put the cash rate up to make the price fall. Was that a good idea? Because we all
fall extraordinarily. It didn't fall. We all thought it would. And like most economists forecast, they don't come true. But
I think the word you're waiting for is yet.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe. But it was striking, wasn't it? That back in 2020, 2021, we had low rates. And then, of course, inflation occurred and all the rates went up very significantly around the world. And housing didn't fall. I mean, we all would have thought it would fall, right? Which just goes to show you the extraordinary demand for it. I mean, it's you've written about this. It's a luxury good, basically. The more we earn, the more people are willing to spend on it. It's a very hard beast to tame, house prices, because people are willing to just constantly throw more money at it. And the resilience of the market is pretty striking, I would say. I mean, arrears haven't increased much in Australia, my understanding, despite that huge increase in interest rates.
But people are making choices, though, about things that they're giving up in order to kind of make sure that they don't lose their most precious asset, particularly if they're buying it. Just on Alison's point about the rental market, though, this is my point about lack of innovation. So in the UK, you've got an incredible housing association sector that offers kind of a range of rental options. Here you've got this bifurcated rental market. You're either in the private sector and you're doing okay, or you're in the private sector and you're in real trouble, or you're in public housing, which is highly stigmatised and very, very targeted. We just don't have a middle sector here. And that would be one innovation, getting a build-to-rent product that actually gives people security of tenure as opposed to a windfall for the first person who sells that property. There are things that, people are doing in other parts of the world. We could do something about that.
Yeah. So just to finish off, the Reserve Bank's meeting tomorrow, is that right? If they put the interest rate down, will that help the cost of living, given our conversation about housing?
My view is marginally. I mean, the media obsesses about what the RBA does, so I find it kind of comical. There's actually very little empirical evidence the cash rate has anything to do with the rate of inflation. I mean, I know that's a shocking thing to say because that's what the media writes all the time, but there's actually not much research. It's a theory. It's actually not much empirical evidence. But also, you lower the rates, the prices can go up too. So it doesn't necessarily, it's good for people who already own, right? Because their payments will be lower, at least in real terms. But for people trying to get in, I don't necessarily see it as a good thing when interest rates go down.
Interesting. So we're not sure if higher rates or lower rates are the solution. We're not sure if prices going down are the solution or up, keep them flat.
Yeah, I think we would expect, obviously, people who've got a mortgage eventually to get a little bit relief when it's eventually passed through. But I don't think that we'll see the rents come down when the mortgage rates come down. And the rents went up when the mortgage rates went up.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because back in 2017-18, we have short memories, but some of the headlines in the Sydney media back then, when we were reporting the house price every day, were double whammy for investors, prices and rents both falling in Sydney. Did we do something right then?
Well, remember that, weren't it?
Exactly.
It's worth pointing out that house prices do fall. I mean, we keep saying they always go up, but in Melbourne, the last 3-4 years, they've fallen in real terms pretty significantly, actually. And that's a combination of, a state government that's been levying very heavy taxes on investment properties and huge supply. I mean, one contrast with Victoria and New South Wales, there's been all these anti-Melbourne articles recently about, the house price is performing so poorly, performing poorly, whatever that means. But it's because the supply is so much greater. Like if you look around Melbourne, I mentioned cranes earlier in the hill suburbs. If you look around Melbourne, there's cranes everywhere. It's actually incredible. Here, none. So there's a planning laws difference.
I might pick up on the supply of housing and the demand question and move to another controversial area, which is immigration post-COVID. Do you think that the massive unexpected influx is part of the issue, given the commonality of that in Canada and elsewhere, and the same cost of living debates that have, and we talked this morning, one of these sessions was about Trump's, tariffs and his activities. Well, he did get elected for a reason, a frustration of the people. What are your views then on immigration as related to the cost of living post-COVID?
Well, I think we've confused a whole lot of issues around immigration. And, I don't want to keep labouring the housing issue, but we keep confusing a migration issue with a housing supply issue. And we say students have caused the housing crisis, so let's put a cap on international students. Now, at my university, we have a bed for every student. We can actually meet that demand. So why are we kind of punishing the university sector over something that's got nothing to do really with the so-called housing crisis? I mean, this was one of those things, to Adam's point, that was absolutely foreseeable, that we would have, a labour shortage, and we would have to correct migration settings. And, again, we haven't planned for that properly. It goes to Adam's point about the COVID response. We knew this was coming. People knew it was coming. It came all of a sudden. And then we kind of constantly confuse those debates. And we say, now we've got a migration crisis, as opposed to we have a housing supply crisis. Martin Parkinson did a superb review of the migration system, absolutely set a course that was very, very sustainable migration, very thoughtful. We should just implement that, and not keep kind of like demonising migrants when in fact there are big systemic issues around housing and other issues that should be solved.
You were going to respond?
Just in general. Well, I mean, I may differ slightly on this. I think our system's completely out of control and kind of unfathomable. I mean, we have almost 10% of Australia's population is on some sort of temporary visa. That blows my mind. No other country in the world comes anywhere near that. More than 2.5 million people are on some sort of temporary visa. I mean, Andrew Norton, an education expert, just tweeted a few hours ago, we have 888,000 people on student visas in Australia. That's kind of extraordinary, right? And since 2006, the number has tripled.
Yeah.
Tripled, right? While the population's gone up 33%. So the universities, with respect, have done very well out of the immigration system. It's the rivers of gold, and I get that. I'm not, being critical. I understand the benefits of that for the sector. For ordinary Australians, I do wonder what the benefits are. I'm in Melbourne on Collins Street, crammed into these trams. There aren't enough trams anymore. You can't even turn around. And I'm like, how is this benefiting the people already here? And there's a philosophical question, right? To what extent do the natives matter? Do they or not? Because it's a difficult question. Because for the people coming here, it's wonderful.
Correct.
But what about people who are born here? That's beyond my pay grade, but it's something to think about.
Alison.
Well, you might think I'm from Scotland, but I'm actually a Kiwi. I was born in Auckland, but However, that means I'm still a migrant. So I always feel a bit sensitive on these questions. Have we got too many migrants? Yes, close the doors. Now I'm in, and it's a great country, and I don't want any more people in. My understanding is immigration's actually fallen by 36% in the last financial year, and it peaked at 500,000 in 22-23. Maybe there is that part again of the planning for it, but coming back to do immigrants contribute to the growth of the economy? Absolutely. There's the three P's of productivity and people and population, and so and again, when I know you're complaining that there's perhaps not enough space on the trams in Melbourne, and I certainly feel it when I'm trying to get to uni to teach them all, and then I can't get parked because there's no spaces there either. But when we didn't have them during COVID, all the coffee shops were shut and the restaurants were shut. So
that was because we shut the coffee shops on purpose. But
no, we didn't in Western Australia.
Okay, but just on the point, no, you're right, it has fallen. But pretty much the norm, net overseas migration, this is 12 months or more, was pretty much 200,000 a year, every year, steadily until COVID. Then there was a dip, and then, as you point out, it went to 560,000 the next year, and then it went to 446,000. And in the first 9 months of the financial year just ended, it was 366 in the 9 months, right? Which was more than the budget forecast for the whole financial year, right? And that budget forecast came down in March, right? When they had the budget. So the Treasury doesn't even know what's going on, right? I mean, it's completely out. I mean, we're almost at double. In fact, hang on, we're more than double. We're more than double the annual rate every year until 2020. That, to me, is extreme. And if you ask any AI, as I did recently, Rock, what they make of Australia's immigration system, shocking, reckless, unprecedented, like globally, nothing like it in the world, right? To increase your population by millions from a pretty small population. I mean, Australia's not a huge country, not a small country, but it's not massive, but you increase your population by 10% in 2 years. I mean, that's kind of wild. Right.
I'll let Jennifer respond, but I might just add some more context. You mentioned before that there's a labour shortage. How does that reconcile with the initial responses from everyone that essentially we've had real wages stagnant? I mean, that sounds like the opposite of a labour shortage to me, but I'm just an economist. What do you make of that?
Well, you just have to look at the unemployment rate, which has stayed pretty constant. All I'm saying was we knew there was going to be a labour shortage post-COVID. We knew that a whole lot of pent-up demand would be released. We could have taken a more orderly approach. I don't disagree with Adam about a more orderly approach to migration. And I think that's about what's the skill mix we want. What's the kind of population settlement pattern? That's the sort of stuff that Martin Parkinson's review was trying to execute. There was, I think, a case for looking at international students as a proportion of the university's overall intake, as a kind of proportion in terms of the makeup of each of those cohorts. That was a sensible discussion to have. What I'm saying is that the kind of overreaction to that has had unintended consequences, certainly for universities like mine, which did not have big international student populations, who were still kind of taking a big hit on that. So I think, again, go back to Adam's point. What is the problem we're trying to fix? What is the best way of fixing it? And what I think happens in these public debates is that we jump at things that are not the thing to fix. They're not the problem to solve, and hence we solve the wrong things.
So,
there is a debate. Well, I think there is a discussion to be had about migration. I'm just saying let's have it in a rational, data-driven way, and let's have it about spatial planning. Let's have it about. But I can tell you, I ran the BCA for a long time. Whenever I talk to an employer, what did they say? I can't get the labour. I can't get the people. I can't get the skills. I can't get the people to do this work. And, we all say, let's scale up Australians. Of course we should. But the time, there's a big time lapse there. So, certainly post-COVID, we had a big labour shortage. I mean, you would agree with that?
Yes.
And we knew that was coming. We absolutely knew that as soon as you release demand into the economy, the labour market would come under pressure.
I'm still struggling to understand why real wages are a problem if the labour market...
That's about productivity. And
certainly the immigration depresses wages here, right? I mean, because if they weren't coming here, you'd have to pay people more and, make them change careers or whatever, move, although that's hard because of stamp duty. It's very hard to move in Australia. but that's a whole other issue. But so yeah, I don't know. I'm just wary of special pleading from big business on skills shortages and so forth. Because obviously they want pay levels.
So I guess my question is,
I get that. That makes
They
sense.
pay more than they pay
that.
on average more than everybody. I mean, particularly on an enterprise agreement, people are being paid, vastly more on an EBA. I just think that you've got to kind of like understand what's driven real wages problems for a long time, and that's productivity. And we can come back to that. But, the data on that is overwhelming. 80% of income growth has been due to productivity change. So
It's a funny statistic. Can I just put a funny statistic? I thought this is, occasionally I see statistics and I can't stop thinking about them for days. Well, one of them is, so we have about 200,000 people in Australia on skilled temporary work visas. I don't know what class that is, but some class. Anyway, we have we're meant to be trying to increase housing supply. So guess how many of those people, what percentage of that 200,000 are in the home buildings trades? 3%. 3%, right? So we're meant to be building lots of houses and 3% of them are tradesmen. Isn't that unbelievable? I still can't stop thinking about it. And I thought, well, maybe this is the evil CFMEU influencing the Labor government. But no, this fraction has been at 3% for decades. People will say, but standards. Well, I don't see houses falling down overseas. I think they're fine. So I don't think it's about standards. I think it's about protecting jobs and so forth here. Anyway, I just think it's an amazing stat, right?
So I just want to wrap up before we get on to productivity. Had immigration been the long-term average since 2022, would there be more of a cost of living problem or less?
So what was the question again? Sorry, I missed that.
If your point was immigration was 200,000 for 10 years prior to COVID. If it was that,
obviously less. Problem.
So this would be less of an...
Well, house prices and rents would be a lot less. Obviously, I mean, the housing stock moves very slowly. It's very hard to change the housing stock.
So is it a lever we should pull?
I mean, remember Jacinda Ardern famously promised to build 100,000 houses in 2018 and built about 602? No, seriously. And we're having the same issue here. We've promised 1.2 million by 2029 and we're already 60,000 behind schedule. It's going to be a hopeless embarrassment. But of course, that's after the next elections. The government doesn't care. But anyway, we're not going to be able to build them.
Alison, your view?
Not to be honest on that one, Cameron. Certainly, again, because it's not been planned and it's come so quickly, it's certainly put us under strain. But we were already heading towards the problems all round. And again, we've got the productivity issue that's been slowing down our standard of living. So it isn't just about houses, and it's therefore not just about immigration. And again, the immigration, I think I'm saying much the same points that Jennifer's making have been really good. We've needed the skills that have come in. And again, I'm also now just thinking about Brexit when, they thought that immigration was the problem there. And so they voted for Brexit. And then everybody left and they had nobody to do the care work. And then they had to start bringing more immigrants in. And they ended up recruiting from countries that the Brits didn't seem to want to recruit from. So, I don't think immigration's a problem, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, it's kind of like one of these hit or mole things, right? Like we say, let's do something on migration. And we don't fix the housing system. Let's fix the housing system. This is the problem. We don't calibrate these things properly. So when I say to developers, what's your biggest constraint on housing? They say labour. They say skilled labour goes to your 3%. And so this is about calibrating the migration policy properly and about really being clear about the skills that we need. It's also about all the stuff we need to do to skill the population. But we just keep sort of like willing to solve one problem and then create five.
I guess to the point, don't we want the wages of those workers to go up?
Absolutely we do.
Okay, so we should have fewer of them so they bid more.
I just think it just doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that.
Because I can tell you this, that it's just not a case that people would just pay more. It's a case that they would not often do some things in Australia. It's a case that they wouldn't do some things. It's a case that person wouldn't open their business on a Saturday. It's a case that they wouldn't expand their business. It's a case that they would not increase the size of what they're doing. So I think it's just too easy to say, let's just cut migration and everything will get fixed.
I guess...
Can I just say something on the wages thing as well? I mean, again, we've talked about average wages have been stagnant since 2012, and they have. But if you split that out, it's actually wages have been growing for people aged 35 and over. Mm-hmm. They've just not been growing for younger people over that period as well.
I guess.
So I guess my point was it's not just if you bring migrants in, it's going to, if you take them out, the wage is suddenly going to go up for everybody.
For young people.
Going up, but they weren't for young people. But they weren't competing in those jobs anyway, so.
But, so I guess the question at the end of the day, so we want wages to go up. Is that what you are saying?
I've always wanted people's wages to go up in line with productivity.
Okay.
Of course we all want our wages to go up. I mean,
Well, people who don't want
as someone who doesn't
have to go on again,
social planning, I mean, I don't know what the equilibrium is of this or that, but I would say why have we doubled the annual rate of immigration from 200,000 to 400,000? Okay, I get there was a year of turmoil, but we've still doubled it in a very short period of time. But just at one point I wanted to make just about wanting to fix things, and I take Jennifer's point about planning system and we need to fix the supply issues, but you've got to ask yourself, what can the federal government actually do at the end of the day? Practically, doesn't really have many levers. I mean, we think it can do everything. Fix the weather.
Should it build houses?
But it's really only got control of immigration.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's easy. Just sign it. You can just sign something. The immigration minister can just literally sign something and halve it overnight. Right? But all the other planning issues, it's all state and local. Like the federal government can't do anything about the eastern suburbs' lack of cranes. I tell you that would just impossible. And it's not going to happen. There's going to be no high rises, I tell you, in the eastern suburbs with hundreds of thousands.
Well, I mean, Sydney did have the biggest construction boom in the 2010s in history, so something happened.
Okay, something.
Not in the eastern suburbs. That's fair. Yeah. So on the wages question, then you raised it earlier, Adam. So we've got to the point where we're sort of not sure if we want house prices to fall. Or rise, or at what rate, and wages we do want to rise. Should we then, if it's young people's wages who are the problem, should we have not increased the superannuation contribution because they need their money now while they're young? Was that a mistake? Because on the one hand, we had the stage 3 tax cuts and things like that to try and give people their money back, and on the other hand, especially for young people, we said, sorry, we'll also take an extra 2.5%.
I think this is, again, this bigger point of we really just haven't been doing very good policy making across a whole range of areas. So, superannuation, do I think it's a good idea? Yes. And do I think superannuation should be preserved to retirement? Yes. Do I think the superannuation system's working these days? No. I don't. I think superannuation has now become really problematic. I've personally done quite well out of the superannuation system because of the way the university's agreements are structured, and I've had 24% of my income put away for, 30 years. But the superannuation system doesn't work for your average woman, and I don't know that it's necessarily going to work for young people. But then do we say, no, you're not to do? People won't save for retirement. If they don't have it. So I still think we should, I don't think not having given them, what am I trying to say? I don't think if they'd got their superannuation as a wage, that would have helped them at all. I don't think it would. I think at some point the system, it needs to be something else. We can talk about X maybe instead.
Well, I guess I'm trying to get to the point. If you want them to have less money, then they can have more super. I'm trying to get an agreement whether we want young people to have more money or less money. What's your view on that one, Jennifer?
Well, the super stuff is complicated. I mean, there's no doubt that, that 2% has really, that had to be paid for from somewhere. And, it's being paid for from people's wages. And so all of these things are, again, these compounding effects on people. That their house prices going up. I don't want to keep going on about housing, but it's not about house prices going down. It's about the rate of pace and the relativities that I think is out of kilter. We want people to save for their retirement. The simple reality is, though, if you look at the data, they're not. And so if you look at those superannuation balances, they are not going to pay for people's retirement. And so I think we're in a real kind of dilemma about superannuation. I don't know what the average balance is, but it's less than 300,000.
Just the people just about to retire.
Yep. And people can't access it to buy their house. Like you'd sort of think like...
Yeah.
Sorry?
Oh, I'm just about to launch into my tirade on super when you finish.
But I think the question, and, I think the challenge is, are we really achieving the objectives that people envisaged around superannuation? Because the simple reality is, when I retire, not people like me have done well out of it, obviously, but young people, people in their 30s, when they retire, they are not going to have enough money based on the current kind of accumulation, particularly women, to retire. They are still going to have to get topped up by some kind of benefit. That review that was done of superannuation a few years ago, I think said something like 80% of people's capital was intact when they died, and they basically passed it on. I think that number's right.
Yeah.
People can't use it for their housing in their life. And so, I sort of think of someone in their 20s, cast forward 40 years, they get, let's just say for argument's sake, $450,000 out of their super. And you ask them, would you have liked to have had the choice 25 years ago to use whatever you had, $40,000, $50,000, $65,000 towards a deposit to your house? I think the answer to that question for most people would have been yes, I would have liked to have accessed that money. Then the question becomes, how do they reaccumulate to actually pay for their retirement? I think, I think the difficulty is that you can't talk about superannuation without committing some kind of heresy. And that is a problem, I think, in this country. As soon as people kind of say the system's not performing the way it's meant to perform, you've got, a death squad out on you. So, that's, I think, a really serious problem in our public narrative, that we're not willing to kind of talk about how effective this is.
So would you agree then that raising the compulsory rate from 9.5 to 12 in the last few years was a mistake, and it's actually amplified this cost of living crisis for those young groups that we're here today to talk about?
Well, I think Adam's point's right. I mean, it's not about one single thing. It's another thing that adds to the problem. It's another problem. And if you just try and pick one and say, there's the problem, ipso facto, fix that, it won't fix that. It's another thing that was added. Should it have been deferred? I don't know. But there was an argument to be had that the conceiving of that was done in a pre-COVID environment.
Yeah.
Can I start now?
Should I put a little timer on for you? I'll put a timer. Okay.
No, well, I think super, and look, it's tough competition for worse policy in Australia, but I would say compulsory super would be up there. I mean, people think it was introduced for some well-meaning reasons about saving. No, it wasn't. It was introduced in the late 80s to give a wage rise without being inflationary. And it was done through the union movement. It was 3% started off. Then in 92, it was legislated, and the rate's gone up ever since. And of course, since then, people said, it's all about getting people to save for retirement. But as Jennifer was just saying, people save too much for retirement. As the Grattan Institute's done plenty of work on this, I might add. People draw down their super at the lowest rate possible. They actually increase their balances throughout their retirement. Breathtaking. So the whole thing is just kind of this, tax concessionary kind of inheritance system. But what really annoys me the most is that it's built on these three myths, right? These three basically unassailable myths. And the ordinary man in the street believes all of them. One, he thinks the boss pays, right? And that's genius. Absolute genius, right? Doesn't realize it's out of his gross pay, right? I mean, as if his boss cares where the money goes to the employee or the super fund. It's like saying the boss pays income tax. No, he doesn't. You're paying income tax. But anyway, this idea's there. And then the other thing is that it saves the government money in the long run. No, it does not. It costs the government a fortune, the superannuation system, and that means all other taxes have to be higher than they would otherwise be, right? So we could just imagine you get rid of the whole system, right? We could all pay a lot less income tax, a lot less, right? Because the system costs money. And that's not even getting into the whole army of advisors and all stuff that kind of associates around, right? Anyway, I'll stop.
Thank you.
But anyway, because before COVID, I wrote about nothing more than super, right? I was the trenchant critic of it, but I lost.
I don't think the problem is the fact that we have to, that there's a compulsory system there that says we don't believe that you've got the capacity to save yourself for retirement, so we're going to help you to do this. I don't think that's what the problem is. I do agree with you that the superannuation system, we know there's much more tax concessions paid to superannuation, people paying tax concessions into the superannuation system than is paid on the age pension system. So I think the problem is not the principle or the concept of having super, it's how we structure it and the fact that we have so much effectively welfare that goes through the tax system there. I mean, Costello in 2006 took off the fact that you would pay tax on your superannuation when you took in retirement, and so we don't pay tax on that.
Oh,
So that was again another concern.
was a mistake.
Yeah,
Exemption.
and that's why we end up with these big balances that we don't have to spend.
So
We could
can I try,
easily start taxing.
can I try and bring this together? So you think young people don't have enough money but should still pay some of their money to super even though they don't have enough money?
I think that. I know the young people would say different.
I'm trying to bring together. So we started all agreeing that there has been a big inflation pulse since COVID. So what we call the cost of living crisis today is really a post-COVID thing. We had quite a lot of housing issues, etc. But also, Adam, you said it's a bit of a global issue.
Because of the COVID response, all countries basically did the same thing, and they've caused this disaster.
And so since then, we've kind of adjusted to the consequences of this response. If we had a time machine, do you think anyone on the panel would have changed the COVID response? And what would you have done?
I was right about everything on the COVID response. So
What would you have done?
Certainly wouldn't change.
And would we have still been here if we did what? Jennifer, you want to start?
There would be lots of things you would do differently. I mean, you look at the amount of money that was actually spent. I mean, it was colossal. I mean, you could have colonized Mars, and what we don't have to show for that is, and obviously, notwithstanding I don't work at the Business Council anymore, you have to provide some kind of incentive for people to invest. We could have done a broad-based investment allowance to encourage companies to invest, which drives innovation, which drives productivity, which drives higher wages growth. That didn't happen. And we could have, got rid of bracket creep. We could have said, what are the big reforms to the tax system that need to happen? Bracket creep being, something that is just, a really silent killer of people's incentives. We could have done something about investment allowance. We could have done something on the social housing front, restructuring the social housing system. I can't remember how much we put in, but it was like in the billions of billions. We could have accelerated, the release of some land. We could have said, well, actually, we're going to, get some of this land serviced that will allow us to kind of fast-track the rezoning. So there's piles of things that could have been done, and we didn't do them. We made those conscious choices not to sort of think about the use of a crisis to do the structural reform on taxation, the structural reform on housing, the structural reform on migration that would have allowed us to come out of this in a very different position.
Okay. Alison.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm just trying to think, if we were to even have this crisis again tomorrow, would we have learned our lessons? And I don't think we would. I don't think.
Really interesting question. If we had a COVID again, will we do the same or not?
Yeah, I just don't.
It's an interesting question.
No,
I don't know the answer.
I'm slightly concerned that we've got a government that's going to be there. And I'll declare I voted for the Labour government. But what concerns me is we need opposition. We need a strong opposition, and it does concern me that this is an time. They know they're going to potentially be there for another 6 years, and I don't think they're going to make any of the big brave decisions that we need them to make with the power that they've got.
Okay, that's the question. Sorry. COVID. Why I was right.
Differently. I mean, you mentioned, was it Sweden or Switzerland that?
Well, it was interesting. Something interesting to reflect on was it's the English-speaking countries that were the most hysterical. I don't know why. It's America, Australia, the UK. If you look at how much money they created, they were the most extreme by far. Scandinavian countries, Switzerland, they didn't really do much. They had brief lockdowns at the start, but they didn't accompany those lockdowns with massive fiscal stimulus like we did. And so they didn't have the same levels of inflation. And that's why I said if it was a Swiss guy on the bus, he would genuinely be interested in this cost of living thing, because Switzerland just hasn't had it.
Yeah.
So there are cultural reasons, and it's beyond my pay grade to know why the English-speaking countries were so hysterical, but they were. New Zealand too.
So we're at this point now, and what we've sort of come to is the cost of living is a real wage for people under 35 type issue. It's not a retiree with lots of super. It's not a homeowners, with older professional jobs. It's a younger family, younger cohort problem. Do we agree on that?
Oh, yeah, but if you're on a low income, you're in trouble. Yeah, and that doesn't confine itself to age. If you're renting, if you've got 3 or 4 kids, and you've got a job as opposed to very secure work, you are very anxious at the moment about meeting your housing costs, be they a mortgage or be they rent. You're making very big trade-offs about what you're doing with your kids. You're worried about losing your job. I don't think we should underestimate for low-income people, irrespective of their age, they are in real trouble.
So I guess moving on to what should we do now, given what we've experienced? And is there a role for redistribution from the old to the young? Is that sort of where we get to at the end of this? Or is there a role for less government policy in areas? What I'm kind of getting to is, what should we do now, given there's some agreement that it's a real wage for the young problem? And what should we maybe avoid doing? We just talked about COVID again. What's the top of mind there, Alice?
Certainly for me, is there's a short term and there's a long term, and obviously we want to be thinking about the long term. But short term does need some relief for the low income households that Jennifer was just talking about. And I was reading the Anglicare report that was put out last week on the cost of living, and they were calling for a wiping of the people who have got energy debt, the energy crisis, and I think the cost was to be $1.5 billion to wipe all the debt, because they really just can never get ahead on this. So basically debt relief. And again, I just keep thinking of these silly policies that we do. So, the HECS policy to wipe 20% of the HECS debt, $81 billion HECS is owed, 60% of that by women. But that's going to cost $16.5 billion to wipe that. And I feel sorry for young people that have got the massive HECS debts. But when you think about that, because it's going to come back as a problem. It's just wiped right now, but the level of HECS fees is still high, and it's going to accumulate the debt on and on and on again. And you put that into a context of, or do we wipe $1.5 billion of energy debt? I just don't think we've got decent priorities right here, and it seems to be about politics, but I'm sure Adam will have some more to add on.
I might go to Jennifer first. Adam's.
I think, as I said at the beginning, it would be great to reframe this conversation to a standard of living conversation.
So what can we do for that? I mean, I'm an economist. I sort of see them as the same thing.
Yeah, but I think they're not the same in the public's mind.
Okay.
One has this sense of temporariness, that, one has this sense of political responses that are about energy subsidies. One has this sense of, short-term relief. Problem solved.
Mm-hmm.
These are long-term structural problems that are now starting to embed very deeply, and we're starting to see quite a serious wealth transfer, I think, in terms of particularly people's access to home ownership without labouring the housing stock. So that's the first thing. Let's start having a conversation about the kind of living standards we want people to have.
Okay.
The second conversation is the rate of growth in our economy, which we haven't talked about tonight, that you need to actually increase people's living standards.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had our rate of economic growth with a 1 or a 2 in front of it for quite a long time now, and that is not sufficient to get people's wages up. And I'm sort of, it's wonderful that the labour market has held up, but you sort of have to ask yourself, how can you increase people's living standards? How can you pay for government services with an economy with a 2 in front of its GDP growth number? That's one question. And that's all of the stuff that Danielle's been working on about how do you lift our productivity? How do you increase our economic resilience? How do you diversify our markets and our trade? How do you improve our skill base?
How? That's what
Well, okay.
I want to know some examples.
Okay, so I'm the Prime Minister's business envoy to Indonesia.
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing more stuff with the Southeast Asian economy? We've got a fantastic strategy now. We need companies to be investing in Indonesia, an economy that's going to grow at 5% and ambitious to grow at 8%. So reorientating our markets, diversifying our economy in a sensible, careful way, by kind of looking at those things where we've got comparative advantage. And this is not about tax subsidies. This is about not making it hard. Massive deregulation agenda, which we should have done in COVID. We did a bit of it. People would make these regulatory changes and then they'd put them back. And you ring people and say, don't put that back. Leave that.
Have you got some examples at the top of your mind?
Oh, well, for example, in New South Wales, they kept the removal of the ban on the curfew on deliveries. It's a really great example.
Uh-huh.
And New South Wales was one of the only states to keep that to remove that ban permanently. So you think about the productivity that comes from delivering things in the middle of the day, the kind of increase in traffic. It's a minor example, but trust me, in COVID, it really mattered. And so my comment to state premiers all the time was, don't ever put that curfew back. Retail shopping hours. If I want to go to Bunnings in Perth, I can't buy certain things before 1 o'clock. Why are we doing this? I've talked about the housing and planning regulation, the cost of employing people, payroll tax, which is just, such a bad tax. I know economists love to talk about payroll tax being an efficient tax. It's a tax on a job. So, how good is that a good tax? I don't think so. There's a pile of things. We know what the list is. Your commission has been putting this list out for years. We just don't want to get on with it. The skills system, why is it still taking 3 and 4 years to get a qualification? It shouldn't take that long now. Why haven't we got a capacity for a student to do some subjects at TAFE and some subjects at university, do some stuff with an employer, get that accredited for your degree, and that's your degree, instead of us saying, no, you've got to do these 6 subjects every year for the next 3 years. Everything else is on your time. Why isn't it on our time as universities? Why aren't we personalising people's university qualification? Why aren't we really looking at our PISA results and our NAPLAN tests, where we're falling behind on pretty much every indicator, and ask ourselves why, when we continue to spend more and more money on education, particularly at the Commonwealth level, we're going backwards in terms of our standards. What are we doing about teacher quality? So I could go on all night on that list.
So can I just summarise?
Now this time we're hoping that the Harbour Bridge is absolutely jammed again on a Thursday night, and that the tourist is now really looking for things to talk about.
So in your view, the cost of living crisis, if I can sort of wrap up, is really a long-term thing that has been amplified by the post-COVID, either the unexpected immigration, the money printing, and we shouldn't be focused on short-term energy subsidies and things like that.
Absolutely.
We should use this as a chance to get rid of, deregulate some of these areas and let some innovation happen on those.
Yeah, good summary.
Well, thank you. It's like
Re-regulations are changed.
It's what would you do now and what would you not do? What would you be wary of that maybe,
Well, you've got to focus on things the federal government can actually do. We're talking about national policy, right? So I don't want to say things that involve the states, because
you can.
That's very difficult, right, politically.
We gave you a chair here. You can.
No. So first thing, the norm, net overseas migration, should go back to 200,000, right? And the federal government could do that overnight if it wanted to, right? It's a sheer choice.
So they basically have Canada's pretty much.
Well, they have. Canada and Australia are the two outliers. They've both had what I would say reckless, crazy policies on immigration. And yes, there's some pushback in Canada. Let's see how that goes. I think there's going to be some pushback here, but both sides of politics don't seem to pay any attention to the electorate on that issue. But anyway, that you could say to workers, if you want your 12.5%, go to your boss and say, I'd like it as pay. Now that would be revolutionary, and I get the politics would be difficult. But it would be an extraordinary boom for the economy. Just imagine if the wage bill, which is something like $1.3 trillion a year, was suddenly increased by 10%, right? It'd be a boom. Probably get more inflation, but don't talk about that. But you could do it gradually, and also it could be voluntary. Not everyone. Some people would actually prefer it to go in their super, but some people actually would like it right now. And that's fine, because as I said, it doesn't save the government money anyway. It costs the government money. So the government would be rapt, take it, because they get to tax it more. And the person's happy because they're getting their money now. So those two things. Oh, and the third thing is more amorphous, and I don't have a particular figure, but I think we need to see cuts in income tax rates. I think it was very sad that Stage 3 was basically jettisoned. And the best thing about Stage 3 was that they were getting rid of the second top bracket, right? And they bloody kept it. And that was a disaster, because it means bracket creep is worse. And it would have just been such a better incentive for hundreds of thousands of Australians to face a much lower marginal rate. Now, the top rate is also an issue. If it had been indexed, it would now be 280,000 threshold or something like that. It came in, it's a 47% rate I'm talking about, right? Which in 2008, I think was 47 cents at $180,000. And now it's 47 cents at $190,000. It should be $280,000, right? And the increase, I tweeted recently, because I've been in the US, I've just been exposed to US tax rates, and coming back, I was just shocked, horrified, like at what we pay here. Like, remember in Florida and Texas, they're almost bigger than Australia, those economies. Well, certainly Texas is bigger. There's no income tax. None. Right? I mean, there's federal tax, but very low. So if you're a bright young Australian, why the hell would you stay here? You'd go over there. 47 cents at $110,000 US dollars a year? That's absolutely insane by American standards.
I mean, I'm very interested in the Texas case because, you'd have to pay a lot more property tax. And I think that would get to the same redistributive, gee, that's a tricky word at this time of day. That same redistribution from the old to the young, that the old are paying more because they own more property, and so the young get less tax on their income. But so you also agree then, you're nodding, Jennifer, that although you want these long-run reforms, there is some kind of redistributive sort of changes in the tax system or that will
absolutely.
do a job.
This is where, I think bracket creep is the thing to sort out. Like I was a big supporter of the stage 3 tax cuts because they did, like 90% of people, I think, were going to pay 30%, no more than 30% in tax. That was a massive reform. And I think that was a missed opportunity to not reinvigorate that. And I think that's unfinished business because that kind of switch to particular brackets is like, it's a kind of massive incentive for them. Similarly, on the company tax stuff, and I would argue this being not being in the BCA anymore, you've got, companies at $50 million for 25% and then everyone else at 30%.
Yeah.
And where I'd start on the company stuff is companies at $250 million turnover because they're trade exposed. And so they're the people who are out there competing with these very low tax rates. And the one thing we haven't talked about tonight, which would start a whole other kind of, 4-day seminar, is modernisation of public sector delivery. I mean, the public sector is a very big part of the economy, and we have not really invested in digitisation. We've not invested in technology. People's services are not as good as they could be. And so the rate of growth in health and NDIS continues to kind of eat more and more of the budget for actually less and less benefit to the community. So if I was, to Adam's excellent question, what can you actually control for? One thing you can control for is the government that you run and making sure that it is as modern, as digital, and that digitisation is aimed at giving people better services, not just efficiency.
So I might try and bring it to a close. I'm out of questions. I'm hoping that you all have some. We've covered a lot of ground, and there's sort of some disagreement still on whether we want the price of houses to go up or down, but wages we want to go up. And we've sort of narrowed down on that. This is sort of more of a young person's working young family question. So even though there's some macro effects post-COVID, the distribution of those effects is skewed to certain groups. Do we have sort of agreement, or do you disagree?
I don't want to labour this, but you can't just say this is a young person's thing. Like, this is, if you're a low...
Or old people too.
There's a lot of elderly people, a lot of middle-aged people who are poor, right? And their life is hard. And just to sort of say it's not like this...
I just mean disproportionately. Like,
I think there's a lot of...
I mean, certainly Brendan's presentation today of older people who are renting, there really are a lot of poverty there. Cameron, there was another one point that I just wanted to, before I don't know where you are at wrapping up some of this debate, but I just wanted to also just again flag back to the living standards, the issue of living standards is fertility. Fertility is now at 1.5, replacement rate is 2.1. And women are not going to have children unless they've got some security and safety around it. And this is where the housing comes back into it. And so I know fertility doesn't often sit in this debate, but it's a really long run issue. So
we'll see if it comes up in questions
as well.
Good point, Alison. I'll pass to Sam. We've got some text line questions.
All right. We won't have time to get through all of these. I've just flagged a few. The first, we don't know who some of these are by. First question is, much of the focus in addressing the housing crisis is on building new homes, but we also have a large underutilised housing stock, especially oversized homes occupied by empty nesters. What policy, planning or financial levers could make it easier to retrofit and subdivide these homes into multiple dwellings, enabling more efficient usage of existing housing and supporting urban infill?
Well, the first policy to get rid of is stamp duty.
I agree about stamp duty. Very insidious tax and not discussed at all the recent federal election. Depressingly, for all the discussion about affordability, zero mention of that. But, the premise of that is that, like the Soviet Union, the government should just seize control of people's housing and force tenants in there. I don't think we can do that. I'm not for that. There are supply issues, but, well, just on the housing building, there's a stat I didn't mention earlier. I don't think I did, but we're only building homes at 180,000 a year now, right? Despite the huge population growth. But from 2014 to 2017, we were building 230,000 a year. So what the hell has happened, right? There's a serious problem. So we need to fix that. But as for the government controlling, kind of how many people should be in a residence, your vacancy taxes, the Victorian government tries to enforce them. Very hard to enforce, right? Very hard to enforce. And you're somewhat insidious. Are the lights on? Are they not? I don't know. I mean, that's what it gets down to.
I agree with you. I think the one thing you can control for, which is a real deterrent to mobility, is stamp duty. Like stamp duty, I think there isn't an economist that doesn't rank stamp duty as the worst of all of the taxes in Australia. So, that should be vote number one, get rid of stamp duty.
Let me just put something in there as somewhat of a housing stamp duty person. The ACT had a stamp duty break for over 65s to try and get them to downgrade. And after a year, they had to put a cap on the value because they were all upgrading so they could shield their assets from the pension. So the direction of the effect of whether people downgrade or upgrade because there's no stamp duty is unclear.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind.
Well, they should, it should not be shielded from the pension assets test. That could be controversial, but
okay.
But it's an outrageous exemption, right? It's outrageous. No government. Well, actually, I think the Hawke government did for a couple of years and then reversed it, didn't they? The politics of it are terrible. But it's this tax shield. You've got to be, it's just obvious. And then you do that, then you can lower all the income tax rates. I mean, that's what the aim should be. Low, broad rates of income tax and get rid of all these shields.
Look, there was a lot of agreement there. Yes, next question, Sam.
There we go. Next question is, we've talked a lot about allowing people to potentially access the super. Would allowing people to access super to pay for housing particularly cause property prices to go up and amplify the housing crisis even further?
I think so. I think that's been part of the problem that's been there. Absolutely. So because all it does is shift out the budget constraint.
But that's what real wage growth does, and we all agreed we wanted that.
Well, it does, except in this particular case, you're accessing your super specifically to buy your.
It would, and I wouldn't have it at the specifics. I mean, people should have their money and use it how they want to use it, right? I mean, some of it will go into housing, and yes, there would be a bump in house prices, but at the end of the day, philosophically, it's their money. Let them have it now if they want.
I'm sort of in Adam's camp on this. I think this idea that you can't kind of do anything with that money until the point of which is gone. I think that's a mistake. And also, again, without going on and on about it, you just can't do one thing. Like if you did that and didn't do stuff on the supply side, sure. But this is someone's money. That's their money, and that's what the whole debate around super is kind of like you do have to remind people, but that was my money. I put that money away, and I would like to control it. I'd like to have some access to it, and I think it's about giving people choice.
And just remember on the super and housing, the most common use of super at age 60 when you withdraw money as a lump sum is to buy a house. And you can buy houses for other people to live in when you're working. So you can buy a house for yourself when you're 60. You just can't buy a house for yourself before you're 60.
When you're 25.
So we sort of forget that as well.
Next question. We haven't validated the statistics in this. I'm hoping they're right. Given that Australia's labour productivity declined by 3.7% in 2022 to 23, the sharpest drop on record, while unit labour costs surged by 6.5% in the December 2023 quarter, and the capital to labour ratio fell by 4.9%, to what extent can these productivity dynamics explain Australia's persistent inflationary pressures?
I'm glad we have the ABS statistician in attendance.
Is a highlight.
They didn't have those numbers there.
That's a hilarious question.
You can go for that.
I don't know. What labour costs went up too much? Was that the question? I don't know.
But I mean,
I'm going to pass on that.
Can we just
There was a story of it.
can you maybe ask the last part of it again?
So to what extent can these productivity dynamics explain Australia's persistent inflationary pressure, that labour productivity declined by 3.7%, sharpest drop on record, while unit labour costs surged by 6.5% at the end of 2023, and the capital to labour ratio fell by 4.9%.
Well, I'll just make a comment on productivity. It has been falling, and it's a big problem because in the long term, it's extremely important. It's basically correlated with wages very highly, and it's been stagnant for years. But there's a funny thing the Productivity Commission recently issued that productivity soared during lockdowns, which I thought was somewhat amusing. So lockdowns are great for productivity because, of course, they shut down all the so-called inefficient businesses, inefficient workers, and so you had a spike. So you have to be careful with the aggregate statistics. So with productivity, I like first principles. I don't like data necessarily. It's like we need lower taxes, fewer regulations, and let people make decisions about their own money, and then you'll get the best outcomes, right? So just be wary of indices.
I think Guy Debelle's lecture this morning, again, for those that have been participating at the Conference of Economists, was really good. And that was that point, again, that with this focus on GDP, and GDP's a bit of a broad, it's got its problems in terms of measurement. But it's also quite difficult to just look at it as a period in time. We've got to look at it over a longer period. And we know right now that the reason that labour productivity is down is because we've got really low unemployment, and that's going to happen. And we've had a surge in hours worked. And again, that also comes back to because of, we're waiting for investments in technology. So, these are just blips.
All right. To what extent is the cost of living crisis related to the number of, quote, non-income generating and, quote, roles that have sprung up yet, which must be paid for by someone? Without meaning to offend and acknowledging that some of these roles are valuable, the person asking the question is referring to roles in security, risk, compliance and monitoring, for example.
Well,
I don't have any.
Well, this is a question about regulation, and there has been an extraordinary increase in regulation. In fact, I did have stats on this. So the IPA over many years has looked at the number of restrictions in federal law. And since 2005 to now, it's gone up by 90%. There's something like 372,000 restrictions in federal law on businesses. And of course, this creates a huge regulatory workforce. And indeed, that has gone up, or will go up, by the end of this financial year by 19%, according to recent IPA research, to 109,000 federal bureaucrats just doing regulatory enforcement. And the wage bill for them is $15 billion, by the way, which is a significant chunk of annual tax.
No, yeah.
And how better is your life with all those extra workers? Are you feeling it? Do you feel better off than 4 years ago? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of compliance is just killing people. And for small business particularly who don't have, armies of people that they can throw to these things, it's really hurting them. But, we've got to, I think, stand back and say, what is the regulation that protects people? Mm-hmm. And what is the regulation that, you just like retail shopping outs, really. This just bewilders me. That, I can buy something in Perth, I can't buy something in Adelaide, I can go do something in Bunnings at this time. You just think, what on earth are people thinking? That we can't have uniform. Now, you may say, well, who cares? But that's a cost to administer. Someone has to administer all that cost, all that differentiation. Marking the calories on a barbecue chicken, that's a lot of work for someone. You may say, that's not much work. Actually, it'd be astounding how much variation there is in the calories to barbecue chickens. But, is this the most important thing for civil society to solve? I don't know. The cost of, I know the GST's been taken off the table again, but the cost of administering, the complexity of the carve-outs on the GST, that something is frozen, it's in something that's not frozen, something that's packaged is in, we've got to stand back and really say, what are the things we're trying to fix with some of this regulation? Regulation's there for public good, for public protection, for protecting citizens. We've gone crazy.
Yeah, sometimes it's there for incumbents as well. And, we desire a complex tax system because it creates...
big business like all this. Big business like it. They can deal with it. And all the small businesses close as they can't handle it. We haven't talked about IR tonight, industrial relations, but I mean, from my understanding, talking to my barrister friends in IR, it's been hopelessly re-regulated. It's shocking now. And small businesses, they're basically criminalised because they don't follow the rules. They can't follow the rules. Yeah. So they're just wary about being raided or whatever or investigated, and then they get in trouble. So it's not worth it.
I think the best example is that the explanatory memorandum on the last industrial relations bill was 517 pages or something. So
that's unbelievable.
That tells you all about it.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Let's go, Sam.
Been a couple of questions around this, a couple coming in the last few minutes as well, on the role of negative gearing in the context of long-run house prices and its relation to inequality. There have been several questions, so I'll leave it at that theme.
Well, it just makes no difference. It makes very little difference. It's an artifact of the tax system. People think negative gearing is a policy. It's not a policy. It's been around as old as the Tax Act 1936. It's just in Australia, you can write off your losses against your income. As simple as that. It's not about housing. It's about shares. It's about anything. And there's been various empirical analyses looking at it. It would make at most a tiny 1% difference or so. If you're going to talk about having a different tax rate for investment income, that's a different question, and I'd probably be for that. Most countries do that, actually. But just all this nonsense from the left about abolish negative gearing, I mean, they don't even know what they're talking about. It's not even...
Does anyone want to add to that before we throw it to the audience? I think...
Do you agree with Jennifer?
I agree. I think, again, as we go into this reform agenda that we hopefully are going to have, focus on what matters, right? The things that are going to move the dial, and we, as opposed to everyone's hit list of things that, they just don't like because they think it's unfair that people have got property that negatively gearing. I think there's been a lot of analysis that it would not move the housing.
The best way to end negative gearing is to lower the income tax rates. Then you've got nothing to write it off against.
Yeah.
Okay, audience, it's your turn. I see some hands shooting up.
Yeah.
All right, Nick, we better...
G'day.
G'day. Been a really enlightening discussion so far. My name's Nicholas, hailing from Brisbane. My question to the panel is, first, brief comment just to introduce the question. So I'm 31. I look at my mates that have grown up, and some of them are on significantly below average incomes, yet have investment properties. Others are on, $500,000 a year and live paycheck to paycheck. So my question is, to what extent is this a cost of living crisis versus a cost of spending crisis?
Let me add to the question. When I was preparing for this, we went out to dinner and everything was packed. And I just thought, isn't this weird? We're having this cost of living crisis debate and we're here with like $18 beers and it's just completely jam-packed. Now, maybe this is part of the inflation story. I'm just getting in with my part answer before I send it over, that we got used to having that big surge of income during COVID and getting paid for nothing. And so we just...
I think a lot of the economy is driven for the luxury end of the market in the CBD. Restaurants, bars and so forth. And we've just talked about the wealth effect of increase in house prices. That has been a big wealth effect. And so if you're one of the lucky people whose house has doubled in the last few years, maybe you are spending a lot more on bars. So, what I'm trying to say is there's, say 80% of the country could still be actually feeling the pinch, but walking around the Sydney CBD may look lovely, but it's at the top 20%.
I think all I was going to say there is that there is, again, this massive inequality that we've got. So, there's, we know that there's spenders out there. And again, just thinking about your point being 31 and some of your friends that are younger having investment properties, I'm thinking of one of my other sons whose friend has an investment property, and he was able to get that, the courtesy of mum and dad coming up with the deposit, and then was able to access the $20,000 that the federal government put up and $20,000 that the state government put up as well. So I just this bizarre policies that we've got, and now he rents this out to somebody else. But there seems to be my other son talks about desperate for this 5% deposit thing to come in, because he absolutely wants to go and find a way to get the money to get this 5% deposit, because he seems to think that there's money to be made, quick money to be made out of buying a property and having it for a few years. So I don't know, there seems to be something about young guys wanting to make money really fast and having a sense that you do that through the property market.
Just a joke, if I may, briefly. When I told a friend that I was doing this cost of living summit recently, he sent me statistics that cocaine use in Australia and New Zealand was the highest in the world. And now I know why. Your friend on 500,000 living paycheck to paycheck. Sorry, just should have said that.
I think you got to be super careful to generalise. Like, I think the CBD restaurants of Sydney are not, a kind of, benchmark of well-being or living standards across the country. If I were to turn up to the local cafe in Yass on a Sunday, and see these people struggling to pay those penalty rates and get a return on their capital as they have to charge money for a cup of coffee or a steak that people can't afford to buy. Go to any country town and see how people are living, and you'll see a very different story. Go to Western Sydney. Our students, are doing it super tough. We're losing a lot of students because they just cannot afford to stay at university, and the HECS thing won't really help them all that much. They just can't afford it. We saw a student doing a 2,500 word essay on their mobile phone a couple of weeks ago. That's the reality of people's lives. So I think with all these things, you just got to be careful about generalizations. There are many people out there, young and old, who are doing it extremely hard in this country, and they are very resentful, and they are very angry, and they are very frustrated that the conversation that they hear in the mainstream media is a conversation, in their view, of inner city elites talking about themselves, as opposed to talking about stuff that matters to them.
Can I, sorry, I just wanted to say, well done, Jennifer, and can we clap on that one? That was, I think, you really put that sober focus back in on this conversation. It's absolutely right. And again, I know I keep bringing up anecdotes, but like Stuart, my husband, he's got children every day at the school. He takes in bread, Vegemites there, because children are always coming to school hungry. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Before we get to the next question from the audience, I will say it sounds like we're dealing with the enigma of progress and poverty, which was a very popular problem 150 years ago when Henry George wrote about it. So isn't that interesting? We've come full circle. Was there we should get one more question. I know Jennifer's got to leave. We better take this one at the front here. Sam, you got one there? Well, let's take two because I've pointed at him.
Okay,
lucky luck.
I'll be very brief. Stephen Milch, independent economist. I won't do a Donald Trump and drop the F-bomb, but I'd like to drop the C-bomb. Competition. We haven't spoken about competition. There's so many of our sectors that are oligopolistic, from supermarkets to banking and so many others that we really don't have a great deal of competition. Is that contributing to the situation?
Yeah, certainly. I read a column about this when I came back. This, I think, was it ANZ that bought Suncorp recently, and I was so angry about it because it was approved while I was away, and I just thought, how is that in the community interest, that approval? And, some of the libertarians might say, well, hang on, that should be allowed, but these are banking licensed entities, right? It's a very different question. They're not corner stores. So there is some role for government to say whether you can merge or not. And that's a good example of government policy basically decreasing competition, right? And just letting the big four banks own more and more and more and more, which of course is what they want. I get that. It helps the big four banks. But yeah, very, very bad decision. And you're right. So many of our industries are like that. And, it is competition at the end of the day that does bring prices down, right? That's the best lever of all, actually. So government regulation.
So when we deregulate, we should keep those regulations to stop the mergers, though. Like, there's a little bit of subtlety.
Well, that answers a different issue, but yeah.
Jennifer, you were going to...
Well, I think everyone has always said, I mean, you've said this, Daniel, that you've got to increase competition. I mean, competition, is the way to get not just prices down, is to make the economy more competitive.
For instance, why don't we let foreign airlines fly from Melbourne to Sydney?
I think
right. Well, I know why, right? Because Qantas sort of have a heart attack. That's why.
But, that all makes sense. Can I pitch to you something about competition? I'm going to intercept your question and add some here. In the US, in Australia, we just had a report about housing construction productivity that said there's too many small house builders. And it's quite funny because in the US, they just had a report that said there's too many large house builders. There's a few large ones and we've got many small ones. Like, is there a competition thing there or do we know where we want to get to is my point. Because sometimes we get there and we change our mind and we go, oh no, that was wrong. We actually wanted smaller guys now. Oh, that's a bit deep.
Well, on the home building front, just briefly, I mean, the problem in Australia, we have all these huge infrastructure projects in, especially Victoria and Queensland that suck up all the labour. And so then there's no one left to build houses. That's basically the problem. And then, of course, compounding that, you have this ridiculous immigration system where 3% of people have home building trades. So Yeah, but it's a licensing issue. I think ultimately just barriers to entry. People aren't able to quickly convert.
And if you just look back and say, what was one of the biggest reforms that drove higher living standards in Australia? It was competition reform. So I think what's the next wave of that competition reform? And you can't just say, let's have more competition. You've got to say, what are the conditions that give rise to more competition and give rise to a more competitive economy? That's the question to ask. And that takes us back to all the things we've been talking about, labour, regulation, tax. Those are the things that drive competition. And, you can't just say, well, let's have more of everything. They've got to be able to operate efficiently.
And the unions deserve some blame here. So Rod Sims, bless him, recently said, I think, that the construction costs in Victoria 30% higher than they should be because of the power of the CFMEU over the workforce. And that, of course, flows through into every price in the state, right, including dwelling construction. 30%'s a lot.
Yeah. I'll just bring up the point. So you want the construction workers to have lower wages?
Yes, some of them.
Okay.
Well, getting back to your cost of 50,000, I mean, some of them, are earning more than senior managers because of these extraordinary agreements, right? I mean, the free market should be able to work and the wage will end up at some equilibrium, but these are not free market wages we're talking about. And I'd make the same criticism of the banking sector and the public sector, the same arguments.
I'm just checking in. So it's really a distributional question here because there's a few things here of no, the wages are too high because they bargained it up when we just all agreed we wanted higher wages. So I just want to get
higher wages overall in the medium to long term through economic growth and productivity growth, not through not through
wage share of income in the economy.
Not through.
That ratio has not changed much for quite some time, I don't think. Although I'd have to check that.
Yeah, check that. It fell structurally for many decades. Okay, the last question I wanted to get to here at the front table.
Let's go to Bob. We must go to Bob.
I'd point it easy. A contract's a contract, yeah.
I'll probably regret it, but...
Yeah, you might.
I hope you'll regret it. You each raised interesting reform ideas, but any large institution is super difficult to change. When China wanted to move out of communism in the 80s, they took a small part of the country and made it a special economic zone. Does Australia need to have a special democratic zone, which is just free from so many of the regulations and taxes, and we just see what happens?
You do that to Northern Territory, definitely. There have been talks about that for some time, parts of Western Australia, the Northern Territory. I'd agree with that. Just as an experiment, hardly anyone lives there anyway. Let's just see what happens. Let's see what happens. It'd probably be very interesting outcome.
So it's almost like, I think for banking and finance, they have this like sandbox thing for new banks to use. We could have like this country, sandbox the country where we test all the new regulations there. Yeah, that's something to talk about over drinks at the end. So I've just promised Alison we'll get Bob's question to finish. Sam's coming with the microphone.
Behind you. This is what you might call giving the chairman a second chance, because the chairman tried to get this into the conversation once or twice, but it wasn't picked up. Because suppose you said to yourself, what makes for a higher standard of living? Then you'd sort of say to yourself, well, what I get paid if I have a job? And the second question you might ask is, do you have a job? So if you looked at the job, just what's happening in jobs in Australia, the last 12 years, 5 years, Australia's been an extraordinary success. We have employed more people as a fraction of our population than ever before. Right? Huge. Any person just looking at the employment data has a completely different story than someone who looks at the real wage data. And you can summarise this in a number of ways. You could say, for example, the unemployment rate now is down to 4%. Last time it was 4%, with 50 years ago? So this is a real puzzle, but it leads to an interesting question, which is that forgetting about wages, with all these extra people working, the cost of living problem should be easier. Why isn't it? So you have to ask the question, who's got the jobs? And who got the jobs is something we've sort of missed out about. But when you look at the jobs, you find an amazing thing. That is, who got all this extra job growth? And the answer is the older people. If you look at the women's labour force, for example, with all the young women getting all this extra education, all the training, which group of women have had the strongest labour market growth? The over 45s.
Public sector.
Over 45. No, it doesn't matter where they come from. That's the reality. And so we have to ask the question, I think, who is getting these jobs? And you tried to present, a simple wage employment trade-off story, which nobody wanted to pick up. But
thank you for picking it up, Bob.
But it's an interesting problem, right? It is an interesting problem. Well, example, we could unwind it and we could say, suppose there was a trade-off. Let's get rid of all this extra employment and get some extra wage increase out of it.
Yeah.
If there was a
compulsory retirement age or something.
And that sort of shifts the discussion a little bit. So I don't think it's the main point that I'm making in any way, but I think it's something which should be added.
So do you think there's a demographic story there in the labour market?
No, everything's population directed.
Yeah, right.
When I say to yourself, the jobs are going to the older group, that's given the population.
Yeah.
Just a brief comment. I think Bob's right. The unemployment rate has been one of the pleasant, nice things post-COVID. There's not much else that's been great, but it has been low. And yes, and employment. But as someone in the audience said, the public service does have something to answer for that. And I'm not saying it.
The data is not good on the ABS.
Yes. But, the Australian had a front page a few days ago, and it did shock me because I thought I was across the public sector figures, and it just showed that from 2019 to this year, federal public service had gone from 145,000 to 213,000, right, in just 6 years.
Which data is
There was ABS?
This data is looking at not continue because the public sector data is not full of that.
Yeah, well, look, I hope so. I hope it was wrong. I hope it was wrong. So it was so insane that I thought this can't be real. It's that's crazy. Anyway,
thanks for picking up my comment, Bob, and injecting it in to finish it off. Thank you all for participating. I didn't get any instructions on how to conclude, so I'm going to just pass it over to Gigi Foster.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the panelists for such an engaging and informative discussion. I particularly want to thank Jennifer Westacott for giving me a warning, because I think last week on Sky News I called superannuation the classic Australian rort. So now I will be waiting for the death squad. Thank you. I want to also especially thank Cameron, who has provided the single most important ingredient in any successful big dialogue, which is excellent moderation of difficult discussions. So thank you very much, and let's show our appreciation again to all of our speakers. So to conclude the evening, all feedback, inquiries, offers of support, introductions, proposals, and suggestions are very welcome by any method through those methods there, as you see. If you want to know more about the Australian Dialogues, especially for those of you who are interested in collaborating or supporting the effort, Google Brisbane Dialogues or Australian Dialogues. Check out those handles on social media and YouTube, and check out Australians for Science and Freedom in like manner. Those registered for this event will receive a post-event email containing links to a brief feedback form, which I encourage you to respond to, as it is key to building the dialogues. Volunteers, event partners, and premium ticket holders are now invited to join the speakers in the Doric room, out the doors and to your right. Everyone else is welcome to stay and carry on the discussion around the bar here on the other side until the lovely SMC staff tell us that it's time to leave, which I think will be around 10-ish. Thanks again to everybody for your contribution on this occasion and during the discussion tonight. Please carry on the discussion at home, at work, and with friends. Travel safe and have a great night.